With the rise of online marketing, its offline alternative, in other words, trade show marketing strategies, may seem to have lost a little bit of its appeal. However, for certain industries in the B2B space, it can be a very effective strategy. That said, without a strong trade show marketing strategy, the success of your efforts is not guaranteed. In this episode of the Predictable B2B Success podcast, we'll look at how to use a trade show marketing strategy to effectively market to enterprise and government clients, how to use trade show marketing to ensure a continual supply of leads, how to use influencer marketing for events to fuel growth, how to decide what sort of budget to allocate towards events and trade show marketing to gain a positive ROI. How to decide whether boosting brand awareness takes priority over generating leads in your trade show marketing strategy. Who you need to take along to execute on your trade show marketing strategy, the role of employee advocacy for trade show marketing strategies, and lead nurturing, along with a whole lot more. For now, let me introduce our guest. Our guest today is a lieutenant colonel in the Israeli Defense Force Reserves. He has over 25 years in the marketing space and almost as many years of military service with the Israeli Defense Forces, first in the career army and later in the reserves, having held a variety of military public affairs positions. Since leaving the career army, he has worked as a marketing professional in the Israeli high-tech industry. He's currently the VP of Marketing at Sixgill, which is a B2B cyber intelligence company that provides cyber threat intelligence to help protect organizations from deep and dark web cyber threats. Barry Speilman, welcome.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for taking time out to do this.
My
Barry,
pleasure.
did I get the description of Sixgill correct? Or was there anything that you'd like to
No,
add?
absolutely. We were a company. We've been around a few years that we monitor, we analyze threats coming, not just cyber, but mainly cyber threats coming from the deep dark web and surface web as well. And we work with a bunch of customers around the world, like banks and insurance companies and law enforcement and government and all sorts of people. And cyber threat intelligence in general is a fast-growing discipline in the cybersecurity space, and it's very exciting.
Excellent. Now, Barry, I think you're also something of a history buff, and perhaps would be more accurate.
A man of many hobbies. Yeah.
Certainly. Would I be right in saying that military history is more your area? Because you've written two books. One of Family Secrets, a novel of the American Civil War, the Transcontinental Railroad, and one man's journey to discover his roots, and the more recent one being From Gettysburg to Golan, how two battles were won and the lessons they share. We'll include those in the link show notes, rather. But
thank you.
Perhaps you could
absolutely.
Tell us a bit more about your interest in military history. And
sure. I mean, it's not just military. I'm very much American history buff. I've spent many years there, and I'm very interested in American history. And in the case of the book about Gettysburg and the Golan Heights, the battle in the 1973 war really combined American history with Israeli history, and in this case, military history in both cases. And believe it or not, despite the fact that those battles were more than 150 years apart, there was a lot of things that were very, very similar from the military tactical point of view. And I had a great time writing that book and interviewing all sorts of people who are still around from the 1973 war. Obviously, I can't do that for people who were from the American Civil War in the 1860s. But when you talk to people who are literally heroes from a military point of view, of course, it's very humbling to be in the presence, and to be able to write about it was very special, and got a lot of good feedback from that book. A lot of people read it and opened a lot of doors for me, and hopefully we'll be doing some more in the future on broadening the subject, maybe to other areas like World War II and Vietnam and other battles around the world in other countries.
Excellent. And do you see any correlations? I'm taking a punt in the dark here, but do you see any correlations between writing those books and military history with what you're doing currently at Sixgill?
No, not really, but I do. But there is a lot of connection to what I did all those years in the military,
Right.
and especially what I'm still doing in reserves. I mean, without getting into details, I'm involved in joint exercises with between the IDF and foreign armies, and there is a connection, and a lot of those folks I work with on a day-to-day basis in terms of those joint exercises really appreciated what I wrote. They thought it was very interesting, and a lot of those, in military terms, all the time, um, all the time, these lessons are relevant. They may be different because, like, for example, in the American Civil War, there obviously weren't any tanks in those days. Yeah. But the tactical aspects of high ground and strategic retreats to territory that gives you control and buys you time, and bringing reserves in, and all of those issues are really relevant still almost in any scenario, even in today's technology. So from that point of view, there's a lot of relevance. Where there is relevance in tying it into what I'm doing today is actually from a different angle. The angle is the theme that was permeating both the battlefields at Gettysburg and in the Golden Heights was the intelligence right. And lack of it, actually, so to speak. The failures of both of the Israeli army in the intelligence in 1973, and in many ways the Southern Army, the Confederate Army in Gettysburg, just not knowing what was going on in the battle, and that was a central theme. And it's a critical thing in any war and any battle. Now, let's move away from military and start talking about business in general, companies. And here, the issue is very relevant, because if a company or an organization has intelligence on what threats are out there from a cyber point of view, well, then they can better use their cybersecurity assets in a better way, because you can't be everywhere. No one has the ability or the resources to invest in every aspect of what is out there today in cybersecurity. So the better the picture you have, right, the better you can apply those resources in the best place. And so intelligence is not just a military thing. Intelligence is also a corporate thing, and very important to organizations, especially at a time when we're living in a world where cyber threats are so prevalent, and everyone is at risk here. By the way, not just companies, individuals too, but we focus on companies at B2B in Sixgill.
Certainly. So, Barry, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
Well, I've been working in public affairs and in marketing for, as you said, quite a long time already. First on the military side, and for many years. I think I'm embarrassed to say how many already. More than, I think we're reaching 24 years in high tech, and in various different companies of all different sizes. The latest one I'm in it was a startup. We're growing, and we're beyond that point, or close to being beyond that point. But in companies of different sizes. So I've had the real I would say luck, but also the pleasure of working in various different companies in the marketing business. Now, marketing is a very big subject, and there's a lot of different things that go into it. Personally, I enjoy very much being out in the field and being at events and having that one-on-one interaction with potential customers. I love the connection I have with the press and with analysts. All this is marketing and or public affairs. But I think in today's world, what's really interesting in the marketing world is everything that's the digital world that has taken over. And whereas 10, 15 years ago, none of us knew about it or, paid really much attention to it. Today, I can't go 5 minutes without having to, show KPIs, proof of this is working or it's not working. And if it's not working, well, let's do something else. We're accountable. And I think that's a good thing. I think that at the end of the day, we all benefit from that. I think the trick is, as a marketer, is to stay in tune with the technology and to continue to, don't be stuck in the past. I mean, to be relevant and to be good and to be successful and to compete with all the young guys out there who are coming out of school with all this experience, you really need to stay relevant and be on top of it. And so I think I've been able to do that, and I think that's something I feel lucky about, and also to enjoy what I'm doing. But I mean, there's so many aspects to market. We could drill a little bit down if you want, but I mean, there's so many different aspects to it.
Because I was going to ask, in the area of marketing, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
Don't know but should. I think that more and more organizations are beginning to pay attention to what I was talking about before, the digital side and the ability to analyze every aspect of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Today, the tools provide you the ability to do that. KPIs, or key performance indicators, are something that any marketer today, that's worth his salt, is going to be providing his management. Okay, now I'm making an assumption that if not everyone, most people are there. Okay, so I'm not sure it answers your question, but for those folks who aren't, they really should, because today, marketing automation tools, we use HubSpot, for example. I'll give a plug to it, although I've used others as well. It provides you the ability to not only have a CRM that runs across the board from marketing through sales, through customer success. It also allows you to see everybody who's interacting with you on your website, on your webinars, on your social media, if they're doing things, we're scoring it so we know how to move them through a pipeline, through a funnel, and as they reach certain milestones, we'll call it, for example, an MQL, a marketing qualified lead, then we're able to reach out to them in a certain way that might differ from the average guy who maybe all he did was visited your webpage. Today, what you need to be able to do is, we have people who do to join our webinars, even people who join more than one webinar. We could talk about that in a second, because I think that's a powerful tool that people should be taking advantage of. But just because they're on your webinar doesn't mean they want to look at your product yet. Mm-hmm. They have enough interest to join your webinar, but now they've got to be nurtured, right? And they've got to get other information, and you've got to try to get their interest so that they want to take that next step to want to see, in our case, a demo of our system, right? Which then I move them to what we call a sales qualified lead, because once we do that, then I'll push them into the world of the salespeople, and there's a handoff from marketing to sales, which is critical in any organization. But those are things that, as a marketer, I'm always cognizant of. Just because someone goes to my, downloads a paper or goes to my website, what it's showing is they have interest. It's maybe not enough interest yet, so we have to nurture them and bring them to the point. The ability to monitor that, the ability to do this automated, that's key today. And I think that that's where everything is moving to. And if you look at the trend lines of where we all were just 10, 15 years ago and where we are now, I think that really stands out in my mind.
Certainly. So for a company like Sixgill that has, I guess the ideal client is organizations like governments and banks and insurance companies, I'm assuming there's more than one decision maker and person who makes the decision making protocol, but how do you identify and nurture each of them? Because each individual will be at a different stage in the knowledge space, as well as the whole buying journey as well. So how do you identify and how do you nurture each one to providing a personalized degree? Is that something that you actually do, or do you take more of an account management?
I think the truth of the matter is, in a perfect world, I think you need to do exactly what you said. Yeah. That's a lot more intensive in terms of the efforts, and it all is a matter of the resources that you have available. I'm still at we're still small, and I'm outsourcing a lot of the work I'm doing, and my team isn't all that big. So I think that we're still focused mostly on the account side. But there's no question that the different buying personas need to be tackled differently. So what we are doing, and certainly it's on my plans to do a lot more of it in the coming months, especially now that we have a system like HubSpot that allows you to do this much easier. I mean, at different stages in the buying cycle, you might want to send out different messaging. So if I'll take the MQLs, for example, those people who are in my system who have not necessarily wanted to see a demo yet, but they've expressed enough interest that they are handled, these are people that I might send a type of newsletter which would push them downloading other products and maybe asking for that demo. I could create a specific list of these people and send them to what we call SDR, or sales development representatives, or inside sales. That in our case, we're doing it with folks who we're outsourcing, but a lot of companies have them in-house, and have these people actively call or engage them in emails, because these are people who have shown a far more specific interest in what we're doing, and we need to push them a little bit, as opposed to regular people who I will call them just regular contacts, who have been on this website, that website, and the kinds of information that they're going to get from me is going to be far more informational. I'm going to continue to push my webinars. I'm going to continue to push them to download material and reports that I've put out. That's a different kind of a thing, that they're not ready necessarily for me to have people call them up or send them targeted emails to ask them to do the demos yet. We still need a little bit of a way to go. Obviously, there's different relationships also for people who have done the demos already with me. These people get passed over to sales, and the sales folks are handling them in a different way. It's already far more personal. And once you're in the funnel, in terms of, okay, I'm now interested, we want to do a trial, a proof of concept, a POC. Well, these are handled by other people in an organization, mostly salespeople, and so the relationship with them is already not in the marketing context. But I think that the better you can create the buying persona. Okay, and we are doing that, by the way, in terms of content that we're writing, which may be the better way to have answered your question in the first place, was to say certain types of content will be geared for different types of people. Okay, right. So there's more generic kinds of marketing material that might just be for educational purposes for the people that we're nurturing, and there's more specific kinds of use case oriented kinds of material that show the value that is going to be more targeted for people who are further in the funnel. I would call them the MQLs and the SQLs in my lingo, if that makes sense.
Certainly. So are you looking at this more from a funnel point of view, or do you actually lead score each lead that comes your way and sort of nurture them into the funnel as required?
Yeah. I mean, it depends where you want to start looking at the funnel. I mean, HubSpot, and I'm sure Marketo and Pargot and all of the other ones who are all good, and I don't mean to give any, points to anyone specific. We just happen to be using HubSpot. And I know it better. The thing is that, I mean, we're giving points to every activity that someone is doing. Someone is on a web page, there's points. Yeah. Someone downloads material, there's more points. Someone is on a webinar, there's even more points. And if someone asks or requests for a demo, there's enough points that you've already been pushed directly to to MQL. Okay, the SQL will start once we've done a demo and there's reason to move forward. But that's on the nurturing side. You can say in a certain sense that they're already in the pipeline, but I think that it's fair to say that what's interesting in a pipeline is really what starts at the sales point, which is our SQL. In other words, once someone's done a demo, they're now in a pipeline so that we can see what's a realistic opportunity. Understand? Because before that, it's not an opportunity. And so if it's not an opportunity, it doesn't interest anybody but me. Okay, and my boss, in terms of showing him statistics and KPIs, that the programs that we're doing to get those leads, because that's, we haven't talked about that, but I mean, we're talking about the leads, but the leads kind of come from somewhere. All of the activities that you do in marketing, the goal is to bring the leads, and then to nurture the leads, to bring it to a certain point that I can transfer it to sales in such a status that there's a chance that it's going to go someplace, because they don't want to waste time, and I don't want to waste their time on leads that are worthless. So, I mean, that's, the whole marketing process is really do whatever it is that you're doing, material, content, events, webinars, digital, social media, whatever it is that brings in leads. The leads then get pushed into the system. The funnel really starts once they're with the sales, and then we're talking about the different sales stages, and then you could see what opportunities really exist, even with the budget attached to them, and which quarter they might come in, and then a company has a realistic understanding and a view of where it stands. And that's what the management wants to see. They're less interested, in my case, for example, in, okay, how I'm nurturing these guys, or how many. They do want to see that the programs I'm doing are bringing in the leads, and what the conversion rates are of those leads moving them east in the funnel towards the sales guys. That we want to see.
Certainly. We were talking earlier about what channels are working well for Sixgill, and you mentioned webinars and trade shows or events.
Not just.
I'm assuming that webinars are used at different stages in the funnel. Would that be correct?
Well, again, it's more of a content-oriented kind of a thing. The different kinds of content that you would do in a webinar would definitely be different stages in the funnel. We have focused mostly so far in terms of webinars on creating thought leadership. So I would say it's more brand awareness, and it's less for the people who are further in the funnel. It's more to get people interested enough to download additional material. They'll come back to additional webinars. And eventually, we'll be able to reach out to these guys, and through SDRs to call them to reach out and set up demos that take us into the sales funnel. And we've had some success with that. I mean, we have people who have been on 5 of our webinars, which means that either A, we're providing information which is meant not to be so much about the company, it's meant to be about a subject, and of course you talk about the company because it's being done on our platform, but that's not the main thing. The value to the customer or the value to the people on the webinar is to learn something that they're spending 45 minutes and it's worth their time, right? That no one's really coming onto a sales pitch onto a webinar unless it's meant to be a sales pitch as the webinar, and that's where you'd be focusing it on different people in the different stage in the funnel, because that's a sales pitch. Now you're showing aspects of the product that are meant to talk to people who are at a certain point. It's obviously not going to interest someone who's never heard of you. Absolutely, your question is correct. That is I think the way we did it. I'll just say one other thing about a webinar, if I can. Although there's been a break in the summer because summer is a very slow month, not just here but pretty much anywhere. We reached the point where we had something like 8 or 9 webinars, one a month, and that's great. It's very hard to maintain it, and we took this break now in the summer, but we're going to start it again soon. The idea really is to create a following of people who want to keep coming back for more. We'll advertise through newsletters and social and all those other good things. We'll advertise these webinars. And to go into a webinar, you of course need to register. So by definition, anyone who's registering is leaving me their information that goes into my system so that they become a lead. All right, and then they get into the nurturing system so that if they do this or they do something else, we'll see it. And once they reach the scoring, they'll become an MQL and so on, all the things we've been talking about up until now. Okay. But the webinar is an excellent tool to do all those things.
I just want to touch upon something you said earlier. You said you advertise the webinars. I'm assuming that you wouldn't go out onto Facebook and advertise there, given the very niche sort of topic that you're dealing with.
But we would do it on LinkedIn.
Right.
We would advertise it on LinkedIn. I've even advertised it on Twitter. We definitely, you can advertise it, and I'm talking about promotion, obviously, on all your own channels, plus our mailing lists, which aren't small, and that goes out. But of course, when you send a mailer, if 30% of the people open the mailer, that's great. I mean, that's good. I mean, that's a really good statistic. So by definition, 70% of the people you're sending it to are never going to see the fact that you're doing what you're doing because they're not going to open the mailer. So, but, and even if 30% open it, I don't know what the statistics are, but they range, if we get 10 to 15% of the people clicking on the link to go register the mailer, I mean, that's pretty good. So, I mean, it's all a numbers game at the end of the day. So that's one way of advertising it. But you could do paid advertisement. You could do it with LinkedIn has special programs, and Facebook does too, but it's really, in our case, like you said, it's less relevant for us. But you can also do Google Words, Google AdWords, which also can target it in the right way. When we do cooperative or joint webinars with others, obviously we're not the only people promoting it. We've done a webinar with one of the research organizations like Forrester and Gartner. We've done that, and that also gets another wave of promotion in its own right. And so it's you want to reach the point that you're able to get it out to the right people and as many people as you can. But it's always it's not so easy. That's part of what if you're good, then you do it better. And there's no no single answer, I think, or magic solution to doing that the best way.
Do you find that joint venture webinars or partnerships result in a better response rate as opposed to, say, advertising?
I think that anytime you're going to do something jointly, I think almost by definition you have two organizations that are pushing it, and that already changes the numbers game. Then it also depends who it is. I mean, the big companies like Gartner, Forrester, they're not going to actively promote it from the point of view of them, but their analyst who's on the call might, okay, and usually will. And he has a following or she has a following of her own right. So that's also an important thing. Also, from, social media or from, I think, a Google point of view, when it's Forrester or it's Gartner, that name's out there a lot more. And so a lot of people who are following them will also be able to see it. I think that definitely a joint webinar makes a lot of sense when you can do it. If you're partners with other companies, and we have partnerships with various companies, I think, and therefore we are doing these joint webinars. I think it's a good thing to do. But sometimes you want to do them on your own for other reasons, because what you're promoting, totally has nothing to do with any of these guys. What I would say to people who are listening to this is that there is a lot of value in bringing a third-party expert in to the webinar. Now that has a price tag to it. When you do it with the likes of Gartner and Forrester and Frost & Sullivan, it's going to cost you X amount of money, and it's not cheap. Sometimes there are journalists or analysts who aren't in those organizations, but they're known on social media, or they write for certain magazines, or they write for certain publications online that are relevant to the field, and therefore they have a following. It'll cost money, but I think that's an investment that's worth it. I think that's an investment if you find those people, because not only will they also bring in people who follow them, but also they're adding value to the conversation that you're probably not going to be able to do on your own.
Certainly. So a bit of influencer marketing there, format. Yep.
I haven't done that yet, other than we had one with Forrester here at Sixgill, but in other companies I've done it extensively, and will do it here as well. It's just something we just didn't do yet. But that third-party participant, analyst / journalist, I think provides tremendous value.
Certainly. And events, they aren't cheap either, I would think.
No.
How do you go about deciding how much you'd allocate to certain events, and
that's a good question.
What sort of investment you would make or play you would make it while attending the event?
Well, I think you're right. First of all, nothing's cheap, and it all depends on your budget, right? And so all of us marketing folks want to get the biggest budget that we can, and each year to go up a little bit and do a little bit more. And I guess we started as a fly. We have to prove to our management that it's working. So that's that. Let's put it this way: we're now towards the end of Q3. So sometime at the beginning of Q4. Here in this company, we sit down and start talking about the events that will be the following year. So the events of 2020, I've been collecting the ones over the course of the year that sound like they're worth checking out. There's certain events that we've been at that we're going to continue to go to, and we're going to put together that list. Now, at the end of the day, it all depends on what my budget is. And the budget allocation, for marketing, is not only up to me, it comes from management, and they'll decide how much marketing I'm going to know. From the marketing budget, that's a lot more up to me in terms of how I want to break it down between the various different tools. And events will probably always be the largest one. But then the question becomes, okay, you have X amount of money. What's the best way to break this down? Because some events are very expensive, and some events are less expensive. And some events you don't know about yet, because a lot of times they come up in the middle of the year and you didn't know about them, or they're new, or it happens. I don't like to do events in the middle of the year that we didn't budget for as a general rule, but it's not something you could live by only. I mean, if something comes up that's worth it, you need to be there, you'll do it, right? So there's going to be things that are going to come up that you might know. But the big events, let's put it this way, The big events, you know what they are. The thing is that in our business and cyber threat intelligence, and there's always all these niche kind of events that are focused on meeting with CISOs that could be very good for us. They're very, very, very targeted, and we don't always know all about all of those. And sometimes the folks who run them don't even advertise them a year in advance. They only advertise them 3 or 4 months in advance, which is, I usually tell them they should probably do it a little early. But it's sometimes it's not me, it's them. But the large events, we pretty much know the main events. And like in our field, in our business, there's this huge event called RSA that takes place in San Francisco, generally in February or March once a year. There's a big event in the UK called Info Security, which takes place in June every year. And there's a few others like Black Hat that takes place in Las Vegas, generally in August. And we can go through it, but I mean, basically in different parts of the world, there are main events that take place in different parts of the world, different times, and you know what they are. And so those sort of become the main ones, right? And for example, there's a big Gartner event that takes place in June that we're going to be going to as well. And you know what the budgets are for them, is that some of them are very expensive and some of them are less expensive. Sure. The question really is, okay, now you're going, how do you want to go? So the first couple of years with Sixgill, we were willing and able to take advantage of being in what they call the early innovation zone or the startup zone, which is great because you can go much cheaper than other places and still have an excellent presence. Right. Until that point that you don't want to be considered a startup anymore, or you don't want people to think of you as a startup anymore, and then you don't want to do that anymore. Or in case of RSA, you've done it once, you can't do it again. They have to, they force you to go out into the with the big boys out in the big section, and the price goes up dramatically. So all of these are factors that you got to take into account when you're making your plans. But you do know the main anchors, I think, of a course of a year, and those anchors fill in a certain amount, and whatever other budget that you might have, now you could start looking for the other ones that make the most sense. Mm-hmm. And they don't always mean exhibitions. They may mean these kind of things called these one-on-one meetings. They may mean road shows that are organized, in our case, to go meet with CISOs of banks and insurance companies in various different parts of the world, and so on. And there's a lot of opportunities like that. So those are the kinds of things I'm also looking for, because those, in terms of leads, are very, very, very targeted. And we found that they're very useful for us. But a show like RSA or Info Security brings in a lot of leads, not all of which turn out to be relevant, but the exposure is dramatic, and therefore I find them to be also very important for us.
So is it more of a brand awareness approach that you take to these events, as opposed to I can expect so many leads coming through and therefore it's going to justify a return on investment?
It's an excellent question, and I think we can ask this question about every one of the tools in the arsenal. And I think it's like webinars too. Is it brand awareness? Is lead generation? And I think that the answer, honestly, it's a mixture of both, because there is no question that if I go to a show that I need to be there, or like to say be there or be square. I mean, if you're not there, you're not there, right? And that's a statement in itself. That's very much a brand awareness kind of a thing. But if I can go to an RSA and get hundreds of leads, of which those, a very good percentage of them are going to be MQLs or SQLs, simply because they're targeted, they have an interest, they've come to us, we've shown them a demo at the booth, or we've set one up afterwards. That's a very high statistical amount for a tool that I might use. You understand? And so it's also a lead generation tool, without a question. But there's a very strong aspect of brand awareness involved with it. Now, if you go to one of these more CISO-specific meeting kind of things, that's a purely lead generation kind of an approach. I wouldn't call it brand awareness. We're not going to go to that kind of a thing just so that we get on. Either we're going to meet these guys who have some kind of an interest and it'll go somewhere, or not. But it's targeted and it's very specific lead generation. So it also depends on what event it is you're talking about. But if you look at the big ones, the big exhibitions like in Info Security and RSA, these are a healthy mixture of both of them.
Certainly. And just for the audience sake, CISO referring to Chief Security Officer, would that be correct?
Chief Information Security Officer. So it's basically, if in the past it was, maybe a Chief Security Officer, today with all the cyber, the roles are expanding or being broken down into different things. I mean, there are people out in various different places that have the job of threat intelligence specialist or whatever, and those are people also we want to target because they understand even better, maybe even than the CISO, has the bigger picture, the whole picture of what the threat intelligence brings to the party. But not every company is there yet. So, the CISO might be the guy who's dealing with everything, and the senior instance, probably the guy approving the budget as well. So there's no question that we target these guys too. But having said that, like you said earlier in the conversation, there are a lot of different people who can be involved in a conversation and involved in a decision-making process. Yeah. And it very well may be that the more important people to speak to are the people who are down a little bit further in the weeds, who are using the system, and then they make the case to the CISO. So in each company, it's a little bit different, and it is a challenge to do it. To a certain degree, it's a sales challenge too, because those are the guys who might actually be speaking to these people once we get beyond the initial interest. But in terms of how their buying process works, and it's different in each company. But no question for us, our main targets are CISOs or CIOs, Chief Information Officers, or VP IT, or Threat Intelligence Specialist Directors, or whatever the job title might be in various different companies.
Sure. And going to these events, I'm assuming you would go with a few sales-oriented folk as well?
Well, we would generally bring a team that would include both sales but also technical. So one of the things that a company such as ours, I'm sure we're not the only ones, but companies such as ours is based on, or heavily based on, is intelligence analysts. Yeah. Okay, so people who bring that intelligence expertise and are able to analyze the results from a solution such as ours. So we would generally have these people with us also at a show. We would have who in many ways will provide a pre-sales function. We'll also have salespeople at the show. I'm at a lot of the shows, but I'm not at all of the shows. But where it's important to have a marketing presence, I'll be there as well. And don't forget, I mean, for people who are marketers who are out there who are listening to this, I mean, we are the guys responsible for the show. Yeah. And there's a lot of logistics that are involved that are on our heads. Now, it doesn't always work out that we can be there, but to the extent that it's possible to be there, I personally think it's important because the other folks who are coming, it's not their job necessarily to be responsible for all the logistics at the shows, nor do they know everything that you've been dealing with behind the scenes, and to sort of show up and have to deal with it, is enough pressure for people like us who that's our job, to put other people who it isn't their job. I tend to not get the warm and fuzzy feeling when I have to do that. Sometimes I have to do it for budget reasons, or you can't be in two places at the same time, or for a million other things that could come up. But in a perfect world, especially for these large shows where there's a tremendous amount of logistics involved, I think it is important for the person who's running those shows or the marketing person to have presence as well.
Certainly. And would the opportunity to present or do a keynote or something of that nature kind of elevate your status or visibility?
Totally. Absolutely.
Yep.
Totally. I mean, you talk about bang for the dollar, or whatever it might be, the currency. I think for sure, I will always look for an opportunity to do a talk if possible, because almost by definition you're increasing your exposure dramatically. Different shows, it's different in terms of how much they cost. But you take a show like Info Security in the UK, it's really not a lot of extra money to do that, to do the presentation, and there's no question that it's worth it. Other places like RSA and others like that, the money that you're going to have to spend to get that presentation brings you to a level of sponsorship which is so high that it may not be feasible for smaller companies. Okay, and on the other hand, you look at the Gartner Cybersecurity Summit that's taking place every year in Washington area in June. It's a significant amount of extra money to do the speaking slot, and yet it may be worth it, because the exposure to that and the amount of people who attend each of those speaking slots is so high that it probably does justify the added expense beyond just the booth. And we are seriously looking at that right now from a point of view of budget and what makes the most sense to do. But certain shows, definitely, without a question, it's a no-brainer. Other shows, because of the amount of money it costs, you really have to be able to live with it budget-wise, and then what you're doing in one takes away from what you could do elsewhere, and it's a game. It's a balancing act of your budget. Where do you want to put it, and what makes the most sense? But as a bottom line answer to your question, there is no question in my mind that if you can have a speaking opportunity at a show, you are going to significantly increase the value of that show and the presence that you have there, and probably the amount of leads that you're going to come away with.
Certainly. And do you find that in the years that you've been doing this, that your inbound inquiries are increasing as a result of it, or is it pretty much we've got to run the webinars and the events in order to keep driving traffic to inquiries?
Yeah. No. Well, first of all, you definitely got to keep running all these programs to keep the funnel growing. That's, I think, a given. I think that beyond that, you got to look for those programs that are going to really bring you the leads that you want to. And here, I belong here in Israel, we have something very interesting. I'm not sure how it's done in other countries, but there's a lot of cyber companies here. And so the marketing people of all the cyber companies are part of a group which gets together. We have a WhatsApp thread. We share information. And even if you're a competitive company, you're not going to be sharing competitive information. You'll be sharing marketing information that's relevant for everybody, and sometimes we can all benefit from it. And I think that is a very valuable thing. But the common thread of all of us, and I have to believe it's true of good old marketers and in any place in the world, is what is that holy grail program that's going to bring you the best leads? And I don't know if there's an answer to it. It's trial and error, and some things work better than others. We're right now working with 4 different programs that bring in leads, ranging from, okay, we did a podcast and now they're going to promote this podcast and they're going to send us leads of how many people I'm paying for, of people who actually watch the podcast, meaning they have enough interest in it that they've actually watched it. Well, maybe they'll now be interested in talking to us, and we pay for that, right? Or let's put it this way, we can do other programs where we give criteria of who our target buyer persona is, and we give it to basically an outsourced sales development representative who starts a campaign to set up meetings for us and calls for us. We'll see how well those do. I'll be honest with you right now, the programs that we're doing are showing pretty good results in terms of bringing in those the leads that we want. We've seen a spike in the amount of leads that we wanted to bring in. It's a bit early to give a report on how they're converting further down the pike, but in terms of the leads that are coming in, so far what we're seeing is pretty good. But I don't think a marketing person ever really sits quiet and doesn't look for additional opportunities of what might make sense to try to be creative and to bring in additional leads and leads that are worth it. The basic stuff, I think everyone has to do them. The website, the content, to download the content, the webinars, the digital, the social, podcasts. All of this stuff is important. I really don't think you could live without it.
Yeah.
The delta is what other programs that are specific to your industry and your sector can really target the right leads and basically make it cost effective for the investment of money to do it. And that's not easy. I don't think anyone has a magical formula, and everyone's struggling with the same thing, but I think there's a lot of cool things out there that are worth trying.
Certainly. Question to do, I guess, more with your background with in public relations or public affairs, as you might put it. Do you see that as being a separate specialty even today, or is it really becoming more and more merged given the digital marketing space?
It's an excellent question. I think that as an overall discipline, it's part of it. but in many, many places it's separate. In other words, there are people who their expertise is public affairs and public relations, press relations and stuff like that. And frankly, my military stuff, that's what I focused on. Okay, I mean, I wasn't focused on the other stuff, which is in other departments. Digital, and once it started, there wasn't always digital, but I mean, once it started, it's a separate department. There are big companies that you'll have VP for public affairs, or that's it. It's a field in its own right. After all, I mean, there are a lot of public relations companies out there. We work with one, a U.S.-based company, that's what they do. That's their focus. So I definitely think that it is separate in the sense that, to deal with the press, to get good press coverage, or working with analysts, maybe you lump those two things together, analyst and journalist relations together. Even that's not exactly the same, but let's say it in itself is a separate kind of a discipline. And in many companies, it might be separate, or it may be part of a marketing communications function, which is very separate than marketing, the larger marketing, which has to do with all sorts of other things. But in many, many cases, especially if you're a smaller company, it really is all together. So, I mean, it's very possible that as we grow, we'll separate these functions out. But I would imagine they would always report to the people running the marketing department, because they do fall into the category of marketing, even though in many ways they're different, if you know what I mean. But the goal is the same, right? I mean, why do you do press? And maybe taking it back to where we were a couple of years ago, you take a small startup company, what you really need at the beginning is your brand awareness, because if you don't have brand awareness, you're not going to get the lead generation. As you grow and more people know you, well, maybe the balance shift, and we've already reached the point where our balance is shifted in terms of lead gen and brand awareness. But when you're starting out, or when you're new, you really have to put a tremendous effort in brand awareness. And there's no question that analyst relations and press relations are a huge part of that brand awareness. And if you go on a Sixgill website, you will see a tremendous amount of press coverage, tremendous amount of press. We put a major effort in it. And in analyst relations, we were a Gartner Cool Vendor in threat intelligence 3 months ago, which is a big deal. And in terms of that, that is tremendous brand awareness across the board. That will lead people to come visit our website or download material, and that will lead to lead generation. But those two aspects are very much brand awareness kinds of things. Ultimately, of course, the end goal still is to bring in those leads. Yeah, but this is sort of what we've been talking about throughout the conversation.
Certainly. I was just thinking, I don't know if this is true or something you've explored, but given the increasing number of threats that are coming into the news these days, there would be the opportunity for employee advocacy writing on those news events.
Well, we do blogs. We're doing more and more of them. I mean, it's an issue here of time, and it's not the first job that, say, analysts have to do, but for sure, the blog on subjects that we are seeing is a big deal. So we have an advantage, because when we're doing our analytics on stuff that's on the dark web, we're seeing all sorts of things. So let me give you a real-world example, literally from a couple of weeks ago, on exactly this question. We did here a threat report on, I think, the first half of 2019, the amount of credit cards that have been stolen and are for sale in the dark web. We put together a report, okay? We promoted that report to the press, and we wrote a blog which was based on the report. So the blog linked to the report. So anyone who sees the blog on social or wherever is going to now take the link and download the report. So I'm getting all their information like we talked about before. They go into our, that's how it works. But meanwhile, we pushed the report itself to the press. And as a result of that, we had coverage on Forbes, on USA Today, and on ZDNet. And that's just an example of the last couple of weeks on a specific bit of information. In the past, we did reports on I think it's called Fortnite, what are those? What's the name of that famous thing that they have those figures? What's that?
Fortnite?
Fortnite, yeah, Fortnite. Okay, so sorry. We had so much press coverage on that. That was an incredible amount of press coverage on that, and one led to the other. We were in the Independent, I think, the big British publication, and because of that, we got on all sorts of other publications. We were in Forbes again, and we were, I think, in the past we've been in Newsweek, we've been on CNN, all this stuff, but it comes from some content which is really based on exactly what you asked. You can write about current events, in this case, something that's coming off of the dark web, that's kind of sexy and scary and real. And it's real stuff that people need to be worried about or be aware of. And then you write that piece, and that it just takes off.
Certainly. Lots of opportunities. Just limited by creativity, I guess.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and all this stuff, for example, you could see on our website under media, all these articles are there so that anyone who's interested in this kind of stuff, they can go in and they can see it. And that's fun. I mean, as someone who deals with that, I mean, one of the bigger highs is to get those articles in these kind of publications. It's just no question about it, that they've taken someone, on these serious publications has taken note of you. And generally because of that, it's going to lead to all these different people writing to you and asking to see the demo of the product or to download more information. It's a cycle, it's just another piece of it. It's another piece in an assembly line of, like we say, move it down the funnel. But if you don't have those things, not just that, all the things we've been talking about, you're going to miss. You're going to miss certain people who might be relevant to your funnel. And, that's at the end of the day, the job of the marketing guy, to do all those different tools so that you bring in the as much of the relevant context as you possibly can in order to create this funnel, so that the amount of context that convert to relevant context and business down the line increases all the time.
Certainly. Excellent. Barry, what would be your top tip for creating predictable B2B business?
From a marketing point of view, I would say, and I'm sure I'm not inventing any wheel. I mean, you have to have a presence. I mean, if you're under the radar screen, and sometimes there's reasons for it, but if you're under the radar screen, from a marketing point of view, you're not going to go anywhere. You might go someplace from word of mouth, and maybe the business requires that, but you have to have a presence. And if the presence today, it's not just in events, which is the traditional thing, but it's in all of the digital things that we've been talking about, whether it's the webinars, whether it's the social media, whether it's material that is on a platform such as HubSpot that allows you to capture the fact. All of this, it's part of that. You need to be there. You need to be doing it, because if you're not doing that in a competitive world that we're in today, you're just going to be left behind. So that, I mean, I guess, that's not. I mean, I'm sure that it's nothing that I'm, inventing the wheel and saying that, but you do see it a lot, that folks just stay under the radar screen, and that's just not. I don't think that's smart, certainly not from a marketing point of view. You got to be there to be in the game. And if you're in the game, you got to play. And you got to play, you got to pay. And it's all part of the same ecosystem that we're in. But those are the rules of the game, and that's how you get ahead in it.
Great. Barry, if somebody listening to this wanted to get in touch and find out more, where would you suggest they head to?
Well, certainly, first of all, you can contact me personally at Barry at cybersixgill.com. That's BARRY at CYBER sixgill.com, one word. That's one thing. You're certainly welcome to visit our website. You can reach me that way too, or you can learn about the company. And if it's a personal question that has nothing to do with the company, but about the other things we've been talking about, including the book, you can also reach me at that Barry at cybersixgill.com as well. I'd be very happy to be in touch and to provide information on a general marketing issue, whether it's about Sixgill or whether it's about some of the other things that were more personal in the conversation.
No worries. We'll have links to all of that in the show notes as well. Barry, thanks so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate with you. Thank you very much.